Hi, my name is Bill Cohen, and today I will be taking the oral history of Vince Wehby. Today is February 25, 2020. Good afternoon, Vince.
Good afternoon, Bill.
Let's start out with the easy questions. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Nashville, Davidson County, Tennessee on October 3rd, 1936.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your parents. Were they born in the United States?
No, they were both born in a little city named Zahle, Z-A-H-L-E, Lebanon, in the Middle East.
And where specifically in the Middle East?
Well, close to Beirut.
In Lebanon.
In Lebanon, yeah. And the parents immigrated to the United States from Lebanon. They were very young when they did. They did less than their teens.
And why did they leave Lebanon?
Well, some of the older members of the family thought that a lot of people were doing that at that time, at the end of the 19th century, and recommended they come to, one of them's older brother was already here, and they recommended that come here.
For a better life?
Well, I mean, you don't go somewhere to have it any worse than you had it before. Yeah, for a better life.
Okay. And eventually your parents both made it to Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes.
Why'd they come to Nashville, Tennessee?
Well, because there were a number of other relatives that had already migrated from Lebanon, in the approximate same place, to Birmingham, Alabama.
And so they went to Birmingham.
Well, a lot of them did, yeah.
Did your parents go there?
They went there, but they didn't live there. They came to Nashville, Tennessee.
And why did they select Nashville?
Well, the main reason, and I guess the only reason, was that my father had an eye problem, and he needed to come to a place that could take care of his eyes, and he came to Vanderbilt. And that when he came to Vanderbilt, and all of our 8 children were born here in Nashville, we've all stayed here.
And what sort of work did your father do?
Well, he was a dry goods salesman, and he operated a grocery store.
Okay. Did your mother work outside the home?
Oh, no. Too many children for that.
Okay. So you said that 8. There were 8 of you.
Yes.
Brothers and sisters?
Yeah, 4 boys and 4 girls. One girl died at the age of 3 with something like pneumonia or something like that. But it's 4 boys and 4 girls, and we now still have 3 of us living. My brother, one brother that's 91 years old today, and my sister, who's 95, turned 95 about 3 months ago in November, and I'm 83.
You had a brother named Al.
Yes.
What did Al do for a living?
Al was a lawyer.
And I used to see these trucks around town, Wehby Plumbing. Was that one of your brothers?
Wehby Plumbing at first was not. It was belonged to a person named Walsh. My brother Charlie, the one that's now 91, bought the plumbing company from Jim Walsh.
And changed the name?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about schooling. Where did you go to school, Vince?
Well, as a child, when it became time to go to school at age 6, I went to Holy Name High School over on Woodland Street here in Nashville. And then I stayed and the name of that school, it was a parochial school, Holy Name Catholic Church and school. And after I graduated there in the 8th grade, I went directly to another Catholic school, Father Ryan High School over on West End, and that was in 1950 to 1954 when he graduated from Father Ryan. And then after he graduated from Father Ryan, he applied for and
You're talking about yourself.
Yeah, I'm talking about myself. I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay, well, let's stop right there for a second.
Yeah.
Did you have any jobs when you were in high school?
Well, I had my jobs when I was young because I was a helper and then a paper carrier, newspaper carrier morning and night, Bannon, Tennessee. And then after that, when I got into high school at Father Ryan High School, is that I still worked as a route carrier and became an assistant route manager. And I worked there until it came time for me to graduate from Father Ryan in 1954. And then I applied for and was admitted to the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And I stayed there from 1954 to 1958 when I graduated. And then I came back home and I applied for admission to Vanderbilt University Law School. I was accepted, and then I came home from Notre Dame, and I was at Vanderbilt Law School for 3 years and graduated from Vanderbilt Law School in like June 1st, around that time of 1961.
Okay, let me go back to your job as a paper boy and as an assistant route supervisor. Do you recall how much you earned a week for doing that?
Well, it was hard to say because when I first became a paper boy, I was kind of subordinate to my brother Al, who had his own paper route. You had to be 12 to have a paper route, but you wouldn't think so with that I'd be working then. But at about 9 and 9.5 is that he prevailed upon me, and with the consent of our mother, to help him on the paper route, which I did until such time as he turned the paper route over to me. We kind of have a history of being route carriers in the Wehby family. Both of my all three of my older brothers and myself were route carriers until such time as we moved on to other parts of life. It was very rewarding, really, to be a route carrier because you met people and you stopped at restaurants while you was carrying your papers in the morning and have a cup of coffee or whatever. And the bad part about it was collecting. It's not that the people didn't pay, but when you have to go to house to house to house, and they say, well, you missed my paper one day last week, do I have to pay the whole thing? I said, well, take whatever it is off, nickel, dime, or whatever it was. But it was fair and it was pleasant. And when I had to give up my one job, the job that I liked was when I was assistant route manager. I had 31 route carriers under me, and there was always a time where one of them was sick or could not fulfill his duties, and that was both a hardship and a benefit to me, because if he couldn't deliver his papers, I, as the assistant route manager for that route that he would have carried, I took that over till he got well or came back, if he'd quit or had been fired. And so for a kid, I was making pretty good money, and it was fun.
What's the age differential between you and Al?
Al, I'm 83 now, and Al would be, if he were alive, would be 86, I'm almost sure. He'd be 87 in August the 14th. In fact, we'll come to it a little bit later, but he's the same age as a person is Tom Higgins. And Tom Higgins' birthday was either the same day or one day thereafter.
Let's talk about Notre Dame. What did you study?
Well, I was a liberal arts student, but one of the main interests that I had there, Notre Dame, I guess like most all colleges, regardless of what language you've had before, you still had to take a language. And somehow or another, I was enticed, or I found it exciting to think about taking Russian. I'd already had Latin and Spanish, but I signed up for Russian, and not many people signed up. I think it was 1,600 freshmen in Notre Dame at the class I was in. there were only 13 students in the class. And I really took to the Russian language and studied it and did very well at it. And my professor thought so much of me in the class that he came to me one day and told me that a Colonel Kirby with the CIC, he had told him about me, and he said he would like to get me transferred, if I would or I could, from out of Notre Dame and to go to Northwestern. But that didn't happen. He got transferred. He was with the CIC, Counterintelligence Corps. But anyway, at the end of that year, it looked like Russian was coming to an end, the language, because it was only offered for 1 year. And I felt like, maybe I'm bragging or maybe not bragging, that I talked to the dean of, I can't think of which department it was, if he would extend the Russian class. And he did extend it for another semester. So then, life just went on as it does for normal college students. And I don't quite know where to go from there. I am not good at Russian now, but I was then. I mean, this may mess things up for a moment, but for example, Я к вам пишу чего-то более. Что я могу еще сказать? That is, I am writing you this letter. It was a line quote from Tolstoy, but I cannot speak Russian. And I mean, when you're now 83 years old and I was 17 or 18 at that time, you lose track of all of that. So that kind of took care of the Russian, but I don't regret having taken it. He kind of criticized me, my professor, Professor Pfizer, a great guy. He asked me about my nationality, and I told him I was Lebanese. My parents were Lebanese. And I'm trying to think what he told me. He said, well, do you speak Arabic? I said, no. Me and my brothers and all of them always told our parents, speak English. And so he said, well, that's a mistake. He said, this was in the 50s now. And, of course, things were pretty hot in the Cold War. And he told me, he said, well, that's a shame. He said, if you were able to speak Arabic and Russian both, you could sign your own marker. And I said, well, that didn't happen, and, then you move on to other things.
So we shouldn't call you Comrade Wehby then.
No, not at all.
Now, you had a roommate in college, didn't you?
Well, it started out, I had two roommates. There was the three of us in the freshman year of college. Both of them were from Georgetown Prep. Very smart boys, smarter than me, if you can believe that. No, they were smart. Okay. But, you moved around a lot of time from semester to semester, dorm to dorm, and that business like that. Well, by the time I was a senior, one of those roommates of mine, his name is Brian, Tighe, Woods. I used to call him Tiggy Woods. He didn't like that, but I don't know how else you would pronounce Tighe except Ty or Tiggy or whatever. He contacted me at the dorm that I was in. We stayed in contact with each other, but this was in my senior year, he contacted me and told me that he had been solicited by the CIA and that he had also recommended me after he had been solicited. Well, I didn't know much about the CIA. Of course, I knew what it was. We'd all heard of it. But as time went on, he ended up being accepted by the CIA. I later, one day, while I was at Alumni Hall, my senior hall, got a letter from the CIA, and it says, Mr. Wehby, we regret to inform you that we're unable to utilize your services at this time. So that ended the CIA business. Thank God for that. I don't know if I'd have fit into that or not. But I thought it was an interesting part of my life.
Sure was.
And
So we almost had Vince Wehby's secret agent man.
that's right.
Okay.
So when I graduated from, should I move on to when I graduated?
Let's talk. Why'd you go to law school?
Well, I told you I went to Father Ryan.
Right.
My oldest brother, not oldest brother, but my brother above me, Al, he went to Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and that's where he studied and was graduated. But when he got out of Catholic University, he went to law school at Vanderbilt. And that was kind of a mover on when I would, it wasn't just that I was devoted to the law practice or being a lawyer, but it did sound exciting. So I applied for Vanderbilt and got accepted when I graduated, and that led to 3 years of there, from which I graduated in 1961.
Who were some of your classmates?
Well, Jim Bass, I say him first because I think he was number one in the class. Al Knight, Knight, was another one. They were, I consider, to be the two highest, two of the best students in my class at Vanderbilt. And of course, I think I got one of the best honors you can get there, because we had a professor, evidence professor at Vanderbilt named Eddie Morgan, who was world known, countrywide known for sure, as being from Harvard. And at graduation time, I was talking to him one day after graduation. We was both right up around the school board there. And he said, "Well, how you doing, Mr. Wehby?" And I said, "Fine, Professor Morgan." I said, "How you doing?" He said, "I'm fine." He said, "I wanted to tell you that you got the highest grade in the evidence exam in the class." Well, boy, he was such a teacher that just awed everybody else in the class, because to even pass and get a grade like that from Professor Morgan. So he said, "You speak with a fine," Italian, write with a fine Italian, I don't know how you pronounce something else there. I said, "Oh, I'm not Italian, Mr. Morgan, Professor Morgan." I said, "I'm Lebanese." He said, "Oh, ho, ho." He said, "That's just a figure of speech of what I was using, but I never heard it that you write with a fine Italian hand." That's what he said.
So you graduated in 61.
Yep.
Took the bar.
Yes, passed it.
Passed it. Where'd you go to work?
You know, I didn't go to work right away. In fact, I checked with an old person that I carried papers with, and the company, Nashville, Tennessee, and I actually carried a couple of routes. I didn't get my status back as a full-timer, but I carried other people's papers for them for about a year, 2 years, and carried, their routes, did their collecting, got that money. And people would ask me, said, "You're kind of old to be carrying papers, aren't you?" I said, "Well, I'm not as old as your postman or anybody else that delivers."
Now, was this after law school or during law school?
During law school.
Okay. I'm talking about after law school.
Let's see, after law school, I went to work for a really good lawyer named R.B. Parker, 200 Union Street, Nashville, Tennessee. But I had already, while I was in law school and doing that other paper route work, is that I was, let's see how I want to put it. I did work for him.
R.B. Parker.
Right. I graduated, passed the bar, and was admitted almost, immediately after that. And I would do research and run, I call them errands. He was really something about investigation, and he had me do all this investigation on personal injury work primarily, but he also would refer cases to me, bankruptcy cases, criminal cases, etc. So that went on, for a period of time until I don't know how this happened, but in 1962, I saw a little bitty note in the newspaper. It wasn't a specific note, but it was just real, like 4 or 5 lines. It said something about Vincent Wehby, attorney, appointed to Assistant United States Attorney. And I didn't know, nobody had called me. I hadn't applied for the job. But then when I got that note and I got a call, and I can't remember who it was from, whether it was from Harwell or whoever it was, the one that was you might know which one that was there.
Ken Harwell.
Ken Harwell. So I became an Assistant United States Attorney for 1962 and 3, and I did not stay with the U.S. Attorney's Office because my brother Al, who was also a lawyer, had a severe setback with his son, or one of his sons, that developed a tumor, cancer of the brain, and he asked me if I would come help him because he couldn't do all of that and practice law at the same time. So I retired from the U.S. Attorney's Office in 1963. His son died Christmas Day, 1963.
So how long were you an assistant U.S. attorney?
2 years.
What sorts of cases did you do?
Anything that came along, but I got to be kind of an expert in condemnation cases. There was a lot of condemnation work that they were doing with, I forget the names of the counties and so forth. But as I moved in there as Assistant United States Attorney, you get appointed to criminal cases and you get your cases that you're hired by. And so you become a general practitioner in many respects.
So you did both criminal and civil at the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Yes.
Did you ever find out how you got to be an AUSA?
No. I come back to, there was a friend of my brother's, my brother Al, a lawyer named James F. Neal, Jim Neal, and he was very influential, and I mean a great lawyer. That's just all you can say. Is the whole bar would have said that he's a great lawyer. So I asked Neal about whether or not he had anything. Did he have me recommended? He's the one that recommended me for the job as Assistant United States Attorney. And he said no, and I asked another person that would have been familiar with me on that, and he said you might try John Siegenthaler. John Siegenthaler was the editor of the Nashville, Tennessean, and I said, Jim Neal said, I didn't do it. I didn't recommend you. I would have. But if you don't know who it was, and Kenneth Harwell, you said you didn't know. I said, no, I didn't know him until I went to work for him on the U.S. Attorney's Office. I said, so that's just how it happened. And Lord knows how long I would have stayed there had it not been for the tragedy in my brother's family.
Okay. Did Mr. Harwell ever recommend you go to see Mr. Siegenthaler?
Yeah, and Mr. Siegenthaler was an influential man as the editor of the Tennessean. And there was an election coming up, and I'm not putting anything off on Mr. Harwell, but I think he wanted to have, maybe a possible chance to be appointed district judge. So I didn't know. I just went down there from the office and went to the Tennessean. He wasn't in. I came back and told Mr. Harwell, I said, well, went to see Mr. Siegenthaler, but he wasn't in. Nothing ever came out of that as a result, but that was just sort of a little thing that...
Mr. Harwell suggested you go down there.
Yeah.
And was that shortly after you became an AUSA?
Yes.
Okay. I want to go back, if I can, to your work for R.B. Parker.
Yeah.
You said you handled your own cases. Did you have an office?
Yes. Yeah. And he didn't charge me. In other words, I moved from graduation to going to R.B. Parker's office, and he paid me $4 an hour, and he had accident cases, anything he wanted. And I think he paid, I'm not sure, my mileage, But he kept me busy, and it was free. I mean, to have to start out in practice of law and not have any any expense is an ideal thing. And telephone, library, the whole business. So I stayed with him off and on, for a while there after I started. Then my brother asked me to come into practice with him, not as a partner, but he still needed, he was new in the practice of the law himself, but I had left, that deal because of the tragedy in his family.
Okay.
So I still would go periodically do things for R.B. Parker for several years, but not anything like handling a major case or something. He might a bankruptcy, preparing a will, things like that.
Now, when you were working for Mr. Parker, I believe you got something referred to you by Judge Draper.
Yeah, Judge Draper knew my brother, and my brother practiced in his court, Al, my brother. Just blindly, I received something in the mail day from Judge Draper, criminal court judge, and he asked me, he told me, he said, as a judge here, we get petitions sent to us all the time from people that are incarcerated in prison, and if there's a petition for a writ of habeas corpus that was sent to me, that I wondered if you'd mind looking over and tell me if you think there's anything to it. Well, I didn't know much about habeas corpus to begin with, but I did. It seemed to me, something. I read it. It was interesting. I researched it. And so I wrote him back, or called him and told him that I did think there was some merit to it. So he ended up appointing Judge, and I can't think of the name, whether it's Welsh or...
Was it Gilman?
I don't know. I just can't remember the name. But anyway, he appointed another a judge beside himself to review set it for hearing. Well, I tried it before that judge, and I lost. He declined the petition for habeas corpus. But I kind of felt like I didn't get really a fair hearing or whatever. You know how a young person is trying something. He thinks he was right, even if he's not. So I prepared a notice of appeal and a narrative bill of exceptions and appealed the case to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Well, of course, when that happened, progress of things go on, and, next thing you know, you're up at the Supreme Court. And I tried that case, I argued that case after I'd filed the notice of appeal and attractive bill of narrative exceptions. And after we argued the case, Judge Gilbert was his name, that was defended, was representing the government. And we was walking out, and he said, I believe you're going to win that case. And I did, and that's the case that I showed you.
Okay. I believe the case was State ex rel Hyatt versus Bomar.
Right.
It was a juvenile case.
Right. He had already served his juvenile time, but he was kind of evidently got in some trouble with the marshals or whatever, the prison. And the director of corrections re-sentenced him. I said, anybody could figure that out. He didn't have any authority to do that. That had to be done, properly. So I think that's why I won the case. Is it because you can't re-sentence a person in a juvenile matter where you keep him longer than 21 years of age.
Right.
And he had done that. So.
And I believe the court complimented you, saying, quote, Mr. Wehby, an attorney at Nashville, was directed by the court to represent Hyatt in these proceedings. He has complied in a superb manner. The court is grateful and thanks him for a job well done.
Was that the Hyatt, or was that the?
Hyatt.
Hyatt. Okay. Yeah.
So.
And I got some publicity for that because it was a recorded opinion.
And how long after that did you become an assistant U.S. attorney?
God, very soon.
All right. So you left the U.S. Attorney's Office, go help your brother Al out.
Yeah.
And then did you remain in private practice from that point on till
from that point on till 2017.
Okay. Handling criminal, civil,
Everything.
divorces, condemnations, murders, torts, you name it.
Right.
In your later years, did you do any mediation work?
Oh, yes. I did quite a bit of mediation work. I'm not sure exactly how that started. A lawyer named Billy Crawford over the law firm not far from where my office was decided on this mediation business, which I didn't quite understand. But anyway, there was a program come up, 40-hour program, which he was encouraging some people to take, and one of them, I did it, and I just fell in love with that mediation and what I thought the sense that it made. I did a pretty good job at it, and a lot of people came along. You know, mediation became a big thing, but it just started, by accident for me, you might say.
And I believe you were a member of the panel of the federal public defender, were you not?
Oh, yes, I started getting appointed cases from day one down at the federal court, whether I was doing civil work or whatever, whether I was no longer there. If you had something, the federal public defender's office would have you, work, ask you if you'd accept something. And I don't think I ever remember turning down a case that I was asked to accept. Henry Martin would know better than that, but I don't remember turning one down.
I know you were in my office a lot.
Yeah.
And believe you were made panel member of the year in 1991.
From Lawyer of the Year.
Lawyer of the Year.
That was from the Federal Public Defender's Office.
And believe that was the first one ever.
That's what Henry tells me.
Okay. Now, what were some of the significant criminal cases you handled throughout your career?
Well, there was one case that, you consider them all significant, but I think it was significant when I represented Ben McKinnon, and he was a bridge builder, major bridge builder, and I got involved in a lot of cases of jury, what was it on the violation of the antitrust laws on bidding. I mean, people that make, paveways and stuff like that, and the bidding, who gets the case from the state.
There's bid rigging.
Bid rigging, yeah. I don't know how I could ever. In fact, we all had kind of a little joke of bid rigging feeds my family, because it was a big thing. It was brought on by a lawyer named Richard Braun from the Department of Justice to investigate bid rigging.
Right.
And that was very plentiful. I mean, it was beneficial. It was beneficial to the lawyers, and it was to me.
Okay.
But I didn't break off anything. I took a lot of divorce cases, a few custody cases. I didn't really like the custody cases because it wasn't really unusual that you'd be up there arguing the case, and two lawyers would be tugging on a kid's arm or something that was up there too, because it might take them before the judge or something. But I just didn't didn't pass up anything. I can't remember any kind of case that came along that I didn't take.
So Vince,
can I correct one thing?
yes.
The case, the Wyatt case, or Hyatt, that I was talking about earlier, when I said I appealed it to the Supreme Court, that's the Tennessee Supreme Court.
Right. So you told us about the road builders case. You also were involved in a case called LOC down in federal court.
Yes, there was 11 defendants in that case, and it just went on and on forever.
And that was Joe Brown and Ray Whitley were two of the AUSAs.
Right, yeah.
Um,
And I think that Gray was the judge.
you're correct, Judge Gray was the judge.
Yeah.
And then you handled a case also, Nichols versus Henderson, which was a case you brought up to the Sixth Circuit. Is that correct?
Yes, how that happened was the Sixth Circuit on its own one day sent me a letter and appointed me on this particular case and sent me, and I accepted, because how you turn the Sixth Circuit down when they appoint you on a case. I'd never seen such paperwork in my life. I mean, it was just unbelievable. But anyway, to get the appeal up and stuff, I had a good friend named Phil Carden, a really nice lawyer in Nashville, and he and I used to get together quite often. We agreed on a lot of things. I still remember Phil that I wasn't an Ayn Rand fan, and that's what he was, but we still got along. And I was telling him about this case, and I said, it's just about to wear me out. He said, well, I'll help you. I said, we're not getting paid for this. I said, it's a court-appointed case from the Sixth Circuit. He said, well, that's all right. He said, send some of those papers or the paperwork to me, and I'll do it. I had never seen a person do that kind of work. This is all without pay for him or I, either one. I know you get paid back then the way they paid your flight and so forth like that, but I don't remember getting paid by the Sixth Circuit. And Phil certainly didn't get paid. But I could give him a lot of credit for the fact of the court's opinion of what the quality of work that was done. Some of that quality was mine, a lot of it was his.
I believe that was, again, another type of prisoner case, correct?
Right.
And I believe the court, in its opinion, said appreciation is expressed to Mr. Vincent E. Wehby of the Nashville, Tennessee Bar, who prepared an excellent brief and presented an able oral argument as court-appointed counsel for appellant.
Right.
And the credit goes to you and to Phil Carden.
Sure.
Okay. And I believe you also were involved in a bank robbery case involving Charles Warden and George Guy.
It's, wait a minute, it wasn't Warden, was it? It was Charles.
Walden.
Walden, yeah.
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Yeah, Charles David Walden, or either David Charles Walden and George Guy.
And that was bankruptcy court, a bank robbery case
Yes.
in federal court.
Right.
And following the conclusion of the case, did any of the lawyers involved make any comments to you about your representation of the defendant in that case?
Well, the U.S. Attorney himself,
And who was that?
Gil Merritt.
Okay.
The case was a pretty long case. What happened that's of interest is that we had an extended motion hearing before Judge Miller, William Miller, federal judge, and James Neal represented Walden. No, I represented Walden, and I guess Jim Neal represented George Guy. But Neal came in, and in this motions on top of motions. You know how Jim Neal could do motions, and he could wear you out to it.
That's very true. He wore me out many times.
He told Judge Miller that he wanted, after got through with the major motions, that he was moving for a severance of the two defendants, Walden and Guy. Well, we argued that for a while. I didn't argue it as vociferously as Jim Neal did. It didn't make a whole lot of difference to me. But Neal told Judge Miller, he said, the evidence is so overwhelming against Mr. Walden that his chance wouldn't have his client could not get a fair trial. Well, they argued that more than I did. It didn't make any difference really to me. But the motion was granted. And it was, so the case was severed, and we tried it. And it was, that's the one case I have to say I really did a good job, because it was a lot of investigation, which most good cases like that are, is that, let me just hold just a second. But anyway, the case was tried. It lasted about a week. David Walden was found not guilty. One of the things that I think caused him to be found not guilty was some of the work that I had done, that government had the evidence of the gun, shotgun, type of hat, everything, and they brought that and introduced that as evidence at trial. Well, I had already seen that evidence, and I just knew, to me it didn't make any sense that at trial the prosecutor put the hat on the defendant's head, and there was no way it could have fit his head in any way. And then also there was either a shirt or something else that I had seen this defendant when he was still in prison, that he tried to try that on and it tore. And Judge Miller said, well, I guess we can put that aside, that couldn't be, it doesn't fit him and whatever. But anyway, as the case proceeded, the jury came back, and there was, before I get to that, there were a number of people in Nashville that had a reputation of being bank robbers, and they called them the bank robbers over at East Nashville. There was a sort of hangout place and so forth over there. And Walden was one of those, and Guy was one of those, and there's 3 or 4 others. And there was others outside of the defendants in the case were in the courtroom watching the trial. Well, when the jury came back and found David Walden not guilty, of course there was no finding for the other defendant because he had been severed. Well, after the trial was over, David Walden goes up to the prosecutor and says, no hard feelings, Mr. Merritt. And Merritt said, no hard feelings, but I think, I still think your client was guilty. And Walden said, well, those 12 jurors said I wasn't. And he walked out. But then they tried to prosecute him again. And it just didn't make any sense to me, but I later learned, and I think I'm right today, but I'm not totally sure, he was charged with bank robbery. The bank was listed, but it was not named as a party to the lawsuit. And some other good lawyers told me that you have to have, in order to bring, in other words, they were bringing a new trial against the bank, which they hadn't included in the indictment. But anyway, that was all over, and I got really a lot of publicity about that one because it was carried in the paper somewhat every day, it seemed like, for about a week. But the thing about it, that those other friends of David Walden sat out in the jury room, and they stood up and clapped when the jury...
They were in the courtroom.
Yes, they were in the courtroom. Stood up and clapped when the jury came back and found him not guilty.
And did Judge Merritt, well then U.S. Attorney Merritt, try George Guy after he got the not guilty verdict?
I don't know, but I'm inclined to say no.
Okay.
Because the one thing that about that case that they hadn't turned over to me, and maybe I wasn't entitled to, they called a witness, the prosecutor called a witness of a guy that I'd never heard of, and my client said, what's he doing here? And I said, well, I don't know. He's a government witness. Well, this guy was a person who had lived in California with Walden. And he told the government that Walden was his roommate, and this guy was an informer for the FBI on the Ku Klux Klan. And that he said all he knew is that Walden said he had been to Nashville and robbed a bank. And so I didn't have information before. But when Mary tried to put that on, I objected to it. And I said, Mary said, if Mr. Wehby keeps asking him questions about this guy, he said it's going to get him killed. And Judge Miller said, what do you want me to do about it? So he did let him have it in, but the jury still didn't believe him. And they had a government witness to an officer named Wagner McDonald, that said he'd seen these two defendants, that he had identified them in the next day or something by talking to people that were in the bank at the time it was robbed. So, but Gil Merritt wrote me a real nice letter that I think you've got a copy of, that told me that he didn't lose many cases, if any, but he thought that he wanted to congratulate me for a job well done, which I was appreciative of the fact that the U.S. attorney who's prosecuting the case, that he lost, but you got to win them or lose them one. But he was real nice about it, and I appreciated.
And I believe Jim Neal wrote you a letter as well.
Yeah, but that was a different kind. Have you read that one? I mean, it wasn't a different kind in one sense. But
no, but it was about the case.
It was about the case, yeah. And something else in that thing that Jim Neal wrote about. Oh yeah, I got appointed federal judge. I mean, not federal judge, but criminal court judge.
Can we stop for a second
Yeah.
before we go there, if you don't mind?
No.
We'll pick that up in a minute,
Yeah.
if that's okay. So you were a solo practitioner for your entire career.
Entire career.
Did you share a office space with people?
Oh yes.
Tell me some of the people that you shared office space with.
Well, I shared office space with my brother Al.
Right.
We were not partners. I was never a partner with anybody. Of course, the work there at R.B. Parker, but I'm trying to think of other people. Of course, Richard Braun, when he came, he was the prosecutor on the antitrust cases. When he came here, and when he left that, we were associates along with he and Fred Thompson, the senator. He was in the office.
I believe Bob Ziegler and Herb Lowenstein.
Oh, Bob Ziegler and Herman Lowenstein. How could I forget those two? Yeah, we shared. I shared offices with them, and I'm still. You know, when you're talking about 50, 60 years of floating around law offices, it's hard to remember who all was there and who all wasn't. But I'm trying to think. There were others.
Okay. Let me move on to something else. We as lawyers frequently talk about the importance of having a mentor and being a mentor to
Yeah.
other people. Did you have any mentors?
I didn't have them per se, but I considered Jim Neal, Tom Higgins, and when he came along, Dick Braun as mentors. They were available anytime that I ever had a problem that I felt like they had a higher knowledge of or an approach than I did. That's not to say that excludes any other lawyers. You can't name them all. And the best thing about the law profession is the ability to be able to associate with other lawyers.
Oh, you mentioned Phil Carden before.
Yeah, Phil Carden.
I want to switch from the law and talk about your family life. I know you're married and you have children because I worked with 3 of your children.
Yeah.
Tell me about your wife and children.
Well, they're the finest people I've ever met. You know, my wife and I married in 1964, and she was an only child. We're still married. We have 5 children, 13 grandchildren.
And her name is?
Her name is Pamela.
And you have how many children?
5.
How many boys, how many girls?
4 boys and 1 girl.
Okay.
13 grandchildren. 10 girls and 3 boys.
And all of your children, your 5, where did they go to high school?
Father Ryan
Okay.
in Nashville.
And where did they go to college?
Well, 3 of my children went to and graduated from Notre Dame. Three of the boys, 3 of the 4 boys. My daughter went to and graduated from St. Mary's, which is sort of in South Bend, Indiana, sort of a touch school with Notre Dame. I mean, you can take classes at Notre Dame if you're in St. Mary's or whatever, but that, and then the one boy that didn't go to Notre Dame went to Auburn, War Eagle. That's what he stood for. So everything came out all right. They all graduated, and they're all doing well.
Okay. Now, 2 of your sons are lawyers, correct?
Yes.
Names, what do they do?
Well, Kevin and Philip, they're both Philip is a prosecutor. They're both assistant U.S. attorneys. He's a prosecutor.
Philip's an assistant U.S. attorney.
Yeah, assistant U.S. attorney. Kevin has worked for years and hope that it lasts. Has been a law clerk for probably the best judge I've ever been around.
And that would be?
Joe Brown.
Okay. He also clerked for Judge Higgins?
Yes.
And Judge Haynes?
And Judge Haynes, yeah. That's right.
And now you have one other son who's up in the federal courthouse too.
Yeah.
And that's who?
That's Luke.
And what's his job?
He's been a deputy federal marshal for maybe 19 years now, 17, 19 years.
Did he have another job as well?
It was what do you call it in the military?
Okay. He was in the Tennessee National Guard.
Tennessee National Guard, yeah.
And did he receive any decorations while he was in the Guard?
Well, yeah, when he served in what was I trying to think? Afghan, and then after service in Afghan in Iraq. And and then he served as a commander of a communication up in East Tennessee after that was over with, and he received an award of, I always get those things. What's the 4th largest star you can get?
Bronze Star?
Bronze Star Award. He received a Bronze Star Award, and he's still working at the marshal's office now.
Okay. And your other son does what?
Wait a minute.
You talked about Luke, Philip.
Oh, Vincent Jr. He's in business. It's a music business of sort. I don't know much about it, but
okay. And Katie, what does she do?
Takes care of that 8-year-old.
Okay.
Boy, I'm telling you, that's a full-time job.
All right. I want to go back and talk to you about Father Ryan, if I could.
Okay.
You're an alumnus, and your children all went there, correct? Yeah. In 1967, did you receive any honor from Father Ryan?
Yeah, I got a call from the principal of Father Ryan that I'd been out, I guess, since, 54, and he asked me to give the next commencement address, which kind of surprised me because my brother also graduated from Ryan, and he was practicing law, and I was kind of surprised that he didn't call him and ask him to be the person to address the membership.
So on June 1, 1967, you gave the commencement speech to the graduating seniors of Father Ryan, correct?
Yes.
And I believe they called you, you were introduced as an alumnus of the school, and the school was justly proud of you. Is that correct? And did you, who gave the speech before you, the commencement speech the year before you?
John Sigenthaler.
And were you given any compliments on your speech by anyone?
Yeah, everybody was nice. It wasn't a long speech, but that's the thing they appreciated most because most of the people there, not the class per se, but the families and stuff. A lot of people said, good speech and thank you for being brief.
Okay. Now, you brought up beforehand the judiciary. I know you were in private practice, you were a panel attorney, you were a prosecutor. Did you ever apply for a judgeship?
Yes,
And what judgeship did you apply for?
criminal court judge, Davidson County.
And that was in 1996, correct?
Yes,
And were you selected for the
Yes.
position?
yes.
Did you ever take that position?
I accepted the position, but on thought, I wrote and called the mayor and told him I decided to remain in private practice.
And why did you make that decision?
Well, you look back, it was actually 1997 when the
Okay.
appointment came out. I ended up practicing law for 20 more years after I decided not to take it. And that's why I didn't take it, because I felt like I wanted to stay in the private practice of law longer. I didn't know when that would be that I would finally stop, but seemed like I didn't have 1917 in mind. I didn't have any year in mind. I just wasn't ready to quit practicing law, and I had a number of things going that needed to be completed that I thought it would be kind of unfair to a client to say I can't be your lawyer anymore because I'm now a judge. So, I still give it some thought. People still to this day ask me, said, you ever had any thoughts about not staying and taking that judgeship job? And I said, I've thought about it, but it's not something I regret. And I had one friend of mine, another lawyer, one time wrote me a letter congratulating me on getting the position. He said, but frankly, he said, I think 5 years from now you'll be glad. I said, he said, I think you'll be glad in a few years because you probably saved your life practicing law. He said, you're a good lawyer, but it can, especially a sole practitioner, it can be fatiguing, and with kids and all the whole business. But
We're here in the offices of the Nashville Bar Association. You a member, or were you a member of the Bar Association?
yeah, I was a member of the National Bar Association, and I was elected twice and served two times on the board of directors of the Nashville Bar. Somebody nominated me again the third time. I didn't try for it. Didn't try for either two, but the first two I did serve 2 different times for the bar.
You've talked about Jim Neal. Please tell me about your relationship with Jim.
Well, he was a good friend, and they were in law school together, my brother Al and Jim Neal, and they graduated both in 1957, which is still to this day in Nashville considered to be the premier law class group from Nashville. And my brother was in that class also. But my brother used to tell me about Jim Neal, and he used a term that I didn't quite understand. He said, you've never seen a guy work like Jim Neal. I said, what do you mean? He said, he's indefatigable. It's a wonder his butt didn't wear out the chair. And that's the way Jim Neal was, and I became his friend because he was my brother's friend. And, we did things together, played cards, had a drink or two with each other, and he referred some cases to me. He had plenty of business, and I had enough business, but you don't ever get enough business for another good case,
Did any other lawyers refer cases to you?
Well, Aubrey Harrell, who was with Jim Neal, at times referred cases. Neal was the first person, but
Right.
The top person. But yeah, Aubrey would send some cases to me. In fact, one case that he sent to me, he called later to see he had part of it that was relative to the case he was sending to me. And he called and he said, by the way, what are you charging? What's your hourly rate? What are you charging him? And I told him, he said, you got to charge more than that. He said, you make me look bad. So I said, well, if that's what you think I ought to do, I will. And it kind of makes me feel slimy in a way, but you know, it was within the range of what lawyers charge for
Right.
particular type cases. But
I believe Tom Higgins also referred cases.
yes, he
to you.
did. Yes, he did.
Now
I consider him a mentor, and Jim Neal both, and Dick Braun. You know, that's
Right. And you consider Tom Higgins was a friend of yours.
oh sure, yeah,
You mentioned playing cards with Jim Neal.
yeah,
There were a group of lawyers who played cards together.
yeah. It was. We played up at Mr. Hooker's office, John Hooker Senior's office.
And who were some of those other lawyers?
Well, Joe Majors was one that comes to mind. That he was a brother of the major family of Tennessee and the football people. My brother Al, he was in that. Herb Rich, a really good guy, good lawyer. Played for Vanderbilt. I'm trying to think of a couple of other. Oh, a guy named, what was his name?
Bill Crawford?
Oh, yeah, Billy Crawford. How did I forget that? Billy Crawford, you couldn't play a card game with Billy not showing up.
Okay. So just a couple more questions, Vince. How would you like to be remembered as a lawyer, both by your clients and by your fellow lawyers?
Well, let me answer it this way. What I appreciate most and remember most is that I practiced law from 1961 to 1961 to 2017. I never had a complaint filed against me. In other words, I didn't ever get called up by, I don't mean disagreement type stuff, but I mean I never had a suit filed against me or a claim of doing anything wrong, and I think that's my highest contribution. I think I was a good lawyer, but there were a lot of good lawyers, and some a whole lot better than I am or was. But that's what I would remember about the practicing law myself. I think I practiced law in the right way.
Okay. Thank you, Vince.
Thank you. Been very kind. You know what I've got to do? What can you do?
Jill, we're done.
Um,
Just stay still for 1 minute, and then she'll come and get us.